No, I say that the deep underlying, I'm a psychiatrist, and so I'm accustomed to looking for the core, of behavior. In other words, what is underlying behavior? People come and ask a psychiatrist, why do I do what I do? If the answer was just at the surface level, they would be able to see it themselves. Sometimes you have to look very deeply to see, well, what is fueling, what is underlying this? And so I say that the fear of white genetic annihilation fuels all of the activity that we see. I mean, it's not only a fear of genetic annihilation, but there's also a sense of inadequacy that goes along with that fear. Do you see? And I say that one of the major evidences of a sense of genetic inadequacy is I would say, the obsession to tan. You see, I mean, physicians, white physicians, every summer in this area of the world, also in Europe, will tell the white population, be very careful about staying in the sun. But the white population, says, and it maybe not everybody, but certainly large enough numbers for it to be a real concern. I have to have a tan. I don't think I look good unless I have a tan. Now, the very tanning mechanism is bombarding cells in the skin that customarily or normally would produce melanin pigment, so that the skin would be normally brown or black, okay? But if those cells have a deficiency of an enzyme called tyrosinase, then they can't go forward and produce melanin pigment. But if I bombard those cells with ultraviolet rays, light rays, I can force the cells to produce small quantities of the tyrosinase enzyme and go forward to produce a melanin pigment. You see, so I say that obsession about having to have color.
How long has white supremacy been in existence on this planet?
Well, I would go back 2,000 years. I would go back to even Greek and Roman times. I mean, if we bring to mind a map of the world and we see this gigantic continent of Africa, and then we see the very tiny countries that are atop the continent of Africa, Europe. And if we look and, visualize on the northern tier of the Mediterranean, Greece and Rome, so that when you had the white population, 2,500 years ago coming into Africa, there had to be the awareness that, white genetic annihilation was possible. And to the extent that people will say that the Greeks were white, or the Romans were white, with all the intermixture that was going on with black people in Africa, then there had to be, there had to be the maintenance of a white population, or saying, well, the white population is going to have certain privileges and the non-white population is going to be denied those privileges. Otherwise, everybody would have been colored. You see, because you certainly had more people in Africa than you had in, the tiny area of Europe. And so if there was just a genetic blending, everybody, blending together, then everybody would have been dark. But if everybody is not dark, then that means that there's a segregation going on based on the ability to produce melanin skin pigmentation, and I say that that's white supremacy.
How does your perception of racism differ from the traditional perception of racism?
Well, I'm not sure what you would call the traditional, but maybe the traditional view says that racism came about as a result of certain kinds of economic activity. You see, in that if you segregate on the basis of color, that you can have a population that you can economically exploit because they are identifiable as being non-white people.
And you say that's not valid.
And I say, no, I say it's upside down, that it's the other way around, that the oppression, you see, because non-white people and black people in particular are not just exploited or oppressed in the area of economics, they're oppressed across the board. Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. The oppression, you see, for what I refer to as white genetic survival is operative in all areas of people activity, not simply the economic area. Do you see? And I think that black people have, well, if we are going to, as black people, take responsibility, you know, and I think that, you know, some white people from time to time verbalize, oh, I'm so tired of you people begging and asking. You know, we're tired of giving. And, you know, I understand that in terms of white genetic survival thinking, okay. But if black people are going to take responsibility for the situation that we find ourselves in, or all the non-white people on the planet, do you see, that are suffering under white supremacy, if we are going to take responsibility, then that means that we have to analyze that. We've thought, well, if they change the laws, everything will be all right. Or if I get a job, everything is going to be all right. If I get an education, everything is going to be all right. So now we find, no, that's not true.
Which gets to my next question, really. How has the, quote, traditional view of what racism is hampered our ability to deal with it effectively? Well,
it's the same thing as a doctor having an inadequate diagnosis. Do you see? If as a physician I have an inadequate diagnosis of the patient's condition, then I'm doing something with the patient, but the patient continues to be sick. The patient might even die. A smart physician will say, I have the wrong diagnosis, or my diagnosis is inadequate. I really need to study this patient in greater depth to find out what is really going on, so then I can then do something about it. You see? And so I'm saying that instead of, because I think that with this understanding of racism, I can understand. I mean, I'm not angry at white people because they're practicing white supremacy. I think it's unjust. I think it's horrible. But when I analyze their situation and say, well, they're doing this to survive. You see, they're frightened. I mean, you know, even the killing of black men. Black men are a threat to white genetic survival.
Why?
Well, because only men can impose sexual intercourse. White males coming out of Europe impose sexual intercourse in Africa on, you know, African women. Women cannot impose sexual intercourse. White women cannot impose sexual intercourse. Black women cannot impose sexual intercourse. Do you follow what I'm saying? That's basic physiology. Do you see? Because let's say if a woman said to a man, you are going to have sex with me, and he says no, and so I pull out an M16 rifle, and I say, you better. Do you see, if I frighten him, then he'll lose the erection. Right. So the male cannot be forced, but males can force females. White males can force females, black males can force females, so that the fear of white genetic annihilation centers really on the black male. Do you see? And that was why I say the Republican Party could win an election by talking about Willie Horton. Do you see? Because
talk about Willie Horton. What do you...
Well, do you see that Willie Horton? You know, Willie Horton. Here's a black male who raped a white female, was let out of prison and raped a white female. Everybody, the white females, that is, got very frightened by that, we are told. Do you see? But I say that what was really being stirred up, not only in the white females, but in the white males also, was here's a black man, do you see, who is invading white females, and that is how white genetic annihilation occurs. Do you see? And so I say that is the deepest issue in the brain computer of white persons on the planet Earth. Do you see? This fear of disappearance. And we as black people, you know, we don't really understand that. I mean, because we cannot disappear based on genetic annihilation. And as a matter of fact, under white supremacy, black people try to get rid of the color.